lesson is about utilization, capacity utilization. Capacity utilization is a concept that you're all probably familiar with, right? I mean, we talk about the utilization of our cells during the day. I have 6 hours worth of work and I have only 5 hours available. My utilization is greater than 100%. Physically not possible, but what you're trying to say there is that I'm not going to be able to accomplish everything that I was set out to do today, right? So that's a concept of utilization. Putting it in definitional terms, it is how much a resource would be used or how much a resource is being used compared to how much it's capable of being used. So when we talk about utilization, a couple of things to keep in mind as you get into computations of utilization. One is what is going into this idea of resource is being used or would be used. Are we including, for example, if you're talking about a process, are we including the time that it's going to take to set up the machine? Are we including the time that it takes for the machine to have to stop between two different batches that are going to be run on that machine? Is that something that we are including in the calculation? Similarly, when you're looking at the availability of the machine, are we talking about the availability of the machine from a 8 hours in a day perspective, or are we saying we expect a certain percentage of time for it to be down for maintenance reasons, maybe it has a history of breaking down every so often, so we allow a little bit of buffer for that. So what is it exactly that you have included in your capacity utilization number is going to be critical information when you are looking at the analysis of that process and saying this is the capacity utilization of this process. What exactly went into the numerator and the denominator of that calculation is something that you should be reflecting on, you should be thinking about. Now let's take a look at the formulas for calculating capacity utilization. And here we're going to distinguish between actual utilization and implied utilization. So actual utilization, the basic idea behind this is how much I make divided by how much I can make, right? So actual production divided by how much I could have made based on the capacity that I have. To put it from a different perspective, although you should be able to convert one perspective to the other based on information that you have, it's also the notion of how much time did I utilize doing something divided by how much time did I have available for me to do that thing. So if I have 8 hours in a day working in the office, and if I utilized 4 hours doing a particular task, my utilization was 50% for that particular task. Right, so we said we're going to differentiate between actual utilization and implied utilization, and the only difference there is we're saying we're looking at utilization based on what the actual demand rate is. So we're not saying how much we can, how much we did divided by how much we can do. We're saying how much we should be doing, right? What is the demand? What's the demand on my time? What is the demand on in terms of the number of units that are required from this process? And if that's let's say, for example, the demand rate is 500 units per day, and the actual production capacity is 250 units per day, we know that the implied utilization is 200%. Right? So what do we mean by it being 200%? It's saying that you either have to double capacity, or you have to find a way of reducing the time that it's taking for it to be done. So implied utilization is a number that's telling you if you were to fulfill this demand, what would your utilization be? Similarly with time, we're saying if I wanted to complete all the tasks that I was supposed to complete, what would my utilization be? So that's the difference between implied utilization and actual utilization. Actual utilization is what you would actually get done, and coming back to the idea of implied utilization, it's what you would have got done if you were to fulfill demand that you have from that particular process. Right. Now let's take these concepts and we will apply them to a couple of examples. But before we get to that, let's look at the idea of a bottleneck. We may have talked about this earlier, but just to revisit what a bottleneck means, and and how it relates to capacity utilization. So bottleneck is any resource whose capacity is less than the demand that's placed upon it. Right? And this notion is telling us that the capacity of any process is going to be determined by the bottleneck. So that's the idea that we want to take forward as we get into some of these capacity utilization calculations, which we'll get into next. So let's take this first example of computing capacity utilization based on a 3-activity process. What we have here is activity 1 is taking 9 minutes to get the activity done. Activity 2 is taking 6, and activity 3 is taking 8 minutes. We have the cycle times for each one of these calculated, and we have the rate per hour, which is the capacity for each one of these as being calculated. All right, let's take a look at capacity utilization being measured based on no information being given to you about the demand. So you only have the cycle times of the 3 activities that we have over here, and you have to calculate capacity utilization based on that. So we're going to assume that the best this task can do is going to be based on the bottleneck task, that we have demand enough to consume whatever we're making. So we're going to take the bottleneck task, which in this case is activity 1. That is our bottleneck task. So the flow rate or the capacity of this activity is 6.67 units per hour. So we're going to treat that as the rate at which the process will operate. So we'll calculate utilization for each activity based on that. And just going by that, the first one is going to be 6.67 being what we are making, and what we can do in this case is going to be 6.67 as well, because it's the bottleneck task. So the bottleneck task is going to be working at a 100% capacity utilization in this case. And then we will look at the next task. So it is actually making 6.67 units per hour when it can make 7.5. So the capacity utilization based on that is going to be 88.93, close to 89%. Similarly, when we go to activity number 2, which is taking 6 minutes of cycle time, there we're going to say that it is 6.67 divided by its potential flow rate of 10. So 6.67 divided by 10 gives us 66.7% capacity utilization. Right? Now let's take a look at this same example, but we're going to tweak it a little bit by adding some more information to it about the demand rate. So here we have the demand given to us as 48 units per day. If we were to assume 8 hours in a day, 480 minutes in a day, we're saying that we are demanding 6 units per hour, right? 480 minutes in the day, so 6 units per hour is the demand that we have. So we can use this to calculate our capacity utilization. Now what you see over here is 2 different calculations for the same concept. And this is where you can see that you can rely on the time required divided by time available, or the quantity that you are making divided by the quantity that you can make. Both of those should get you to the same solution. So let's take a look at what we're doing in terms of time required divided by time available. So you have 9 minutes cycle time for one of the activities, activity A. So the time required is going to be 9 by 48, gives us 432 minutes, which is the time required to fulfill demand. You divide that by 480 and you get 90%, right? 0.9 or 90%. Similarly, if you look at task 2, you are also going to make only 48 units, even if you're capable of making more, because that's the demand per day, and that gives us 384 units, giving us a capacity utilization of 80%. And similarly for our the third task, or in this case task B, which takes 6 minutes and 48 units. So we're going to use 280 minutes off the 480 minutes of time available, and that gives us a 60% utilization. Now the same calculation the same results can be achieved through a different calculation. and that's going to be your actual rate divided by the actual capacity. So here we're saying that we are producing at the rate of 6 per hour. Dividing that by 6.67 will give you the utilization. And as you can see, if we were to go through these calculations, you get the same results. 90%, 80%, 60%, the same results going by both calculations. But here what we have done is we have incorporated the information about the demand. The demand is less than the maximum that can be done from this process. So in some sense, we're saying that the demand is the bottleneck in this case, and we're treating that as what is constraining the whole process and computing utilization based on that. One more thing about computing capacity utilization, sometimes you're interested in simply looking at the utilization of the whole process, right? You're saying you have hired 3 people to work on these 3 different tasks, A, B, and C, and all I care about is the utilization of this whole process. So this can be calculated based on, well, we are producing 48 units. Each unit represents a 9 plus 6, which is 15, plus 8, 23 minutes of time. So we have 23 minutes that are utilized for every unit that we make, and that gives us 1104 minutes of time utilized. So this is person minutes going into the production of the daily demand. And then the total time available, we simply had 3 people available. So we're going to take the 3 full-time people that were available for 8 hours, and that's going to give us our time available, which is 1,440 minutes, right? 1,440 minutes. So our capacity utilization works out to 77%. Now, if you compare this to the capacity utilization that we calculated earlier, for each one of the 3 different tasks, it was 90, 80, and 60. And what you can see is that 77% is the average of those 3 capacity utilizations that we calculated for each one of them individually. In both cases, we were treating the demand as being the bottleneck. So, and this is more useful from the point of view of saying if you're looking at how you are utilizing the resources that you have. You have 3 people who are working 8 hours a day. The average utilization of those people is 77%. So here are the calculations that you just saw about capacity utilization, the average capacity utilization. So far, we've looked at everything that we've looked at has been based on averages, right? We've looked at average flow rate, average flow time, average inventory. In reality, that's not the case. We have some variability in processes, some variability in activities for different reasons. We'll get into those reasons later. However, we know that there's going to be some variability in processes. And how is that going to affect the available capacity of a process, the available capacity of an activity? So let's take a minute and think about how variability would affect availability of capacity. All right. When we have variability in a process, and variability can be above the average or below the average. Below the average is going to be beneficial in terms of it taking less time, the activity is more idle, the process is more idle if it's taking less than the average. But if it goes higher than the average, it goes on the higher side, even if you have a process that is completely balanced, that is made up of multiple activities that are have the same average processing time, the moment one of them goes above that average, what is going to happen is that all of the tasks behind it are going to have blockage, right? They're going to be, the next task is having a delay, therefore they're going to have inventory that is going to get accumulated because the next task is not able to take it up. So the delays will get passed on to the next task. Now, once that activity speeds up and recovers from that being above the average, the speed up is not going to get passed on. So what can happen when there's variability and it's on the higher side from the average is that the delays will get passed on to the next task, the next activities, whereas the speed up or catching up may not get passed on to the subsequent activities. So you'll have a backlog. What does that mean in terms of capacity? The available capacity will get reduced, and when you you're planning capacity utilization, you have to keep that variability into account, because the actual available capacity is going to be less based on the variability that you're expecting in the different processes, in the different tasks in the process. So there's this perspective of the theory of constraints that is based on the idea of incorporating the notion of bottlenecks as well as the notion of variability when you're talking about improving a process. So what is this perspective? It comes from this book called The Goal, and it's a highly recommended book if you're interested to learn more about operations management. It takes this idea of bottlenecks, throughput time, flow rate, throughput rate, and talks about it from a very down-to-earth perspective. It explains it in a very nice way. Anyways, coming back to the idea of the theory of constraints, the crux of this is that you should always focus on the bottleneck task when you are trying to improve a process. So if you have many activities and you have a task that has more demand than it can handle, then that's going to be the bottleneck, and you should focus on improving that bottleneck. Why? Because the total flow rate, throughput rate from the whole process is going to be determined by the bottleneck. So any kind of problem with that bottleneck task, any kind of variability going above the average is going to affect the total throughput rate of the whole process. As a continuous improvement initiative, what this talks about is focus on the bottleneck and get the most out of it, try to improve it, and subordinate all the other tasks to this bottleneck task. So even if other tasks have to sit idle for a little bit or have to use up their capacity in things such as multiple setups, and it's not delaying your input into the bottleneck, then it's okay to have that for the non-bottleneck tasks. So the perspective is absolutely treat the bottleneck as the time at the bottleneck as being very, very critical, and use that in the most productive way. From a continuous improvement perspective, what this talks about is that once you've improved your processes, once you've improved the bottleneck, that would be the only way to improve the process, would be to improve the bottleneck, which means you have gotten more capacity out of it, you have been able to get more throughput, more product going out of the bottleneck task. What can happen is some other task might turn up as being the bottleneck. So you've reduced the cycle time on the bottleneck task, and some other task becomes the bottleneck, in which case you focus on improvements on that, because now you have a new bottleneck. So that, in short, is a way of continuous improvement that starts off with the basic idea of focusing on bottlenecks. So in closing this lesson on capacity, what we should take away from this is that when you're thinking about capacity, when you're thinking about capacity utilization, two concepts, two ideas, which is the bottleneck and how much variability are we talking about in the processing times of all the activities, are two crucial concepts that we want to keep in mind as we try to plan for a certain capacity utilization.